Broken marriage. She suddenly wed the guard, unaware he was a hidden millionaire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the glass windows. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she clutched the final divorce papers. Her once dazzling marriage, celebrated in magazines and envied by neighbors, had collapsed into dust. Her husband had walked out with another woman on his arm, leaving her with nothing but shame and the hollow echo of whispered gossip. The headlines were cruel. The abandoned wife of a tycoon. Every whisper on the street carried daggers. To the world, she was no longer the elegant wife of a wealthy man. She was now a discarded woman, a symbol of failure. She tried to breathe, but the air inside the room felt too tight, pressing against her chest. She stepped outside, wandering aimlessly into the pouring rain as though she could wash away the humiliation clinging to her skin. The city lights blurred through her tears, and her heels splashed into puddles that stained the hem of her once pristine dress. "Claire?" A voice startled her. It was deep, firm, and surprisingly gentle. She turned and saw him, the quiet guard who had stood outside her building for months, always unnoticed, always silent. Tonight, his uniform was drenched, his black hair plastered to his forehead, yet his eyes held a steady fire that seemed immune to the storm. She wanted to laugh bitterly. A guard. The last person society would ever imagine her standing next to. Yet in that moment, he was the only one who looked at her without judgment. "You should not be out here like this," he said, his tone calm but commanding. Her lips trembled. "Do you know what it is like to have your life torn apart in front of everyone? To be humiliated and left with nothing?" He did not answer with empty words. Instead, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth shocked her. Not because of the fabric, but because someone had chosen to protect her when the rest of the world turned away. Claire's heart pounded with a mix of anger and desperation. Something reckless slipped from her mouth, a declaration she never thought she would say aloud. "Then marry me," she whispered through clenched teeth, her eyes searching his. "If society wants a spectacle, let us give them one. I will not let them laugh at me again." "Onda." The guard froze, his jaw tightening as rainwater streamed down his face. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by thunder rolling overhead. Then, to her shock, he nodded slowly. "If that is what you want," he said. His words were simple, but the weight of them made the ground beneath her feel unsteady. And just like that, a reckless vow was made under a stormy sky, two broken souls bound by a marriage neither of them truly believed in. But what Claire could not have known that night was that the man standing before her, wearing a soaked uniform and offering nothing but a coat, was hiding a truth so vast it could shatter every assumption she had ever made about love, dignity, and wealth. This was not the end of her humiliation. This was the beginning of a story that would rewrite her life forever. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the weight of last night's words still lingered. Claire awoke with swollen eyes, her head pounding from sleepless hours. She looked at the coat lying on the chair, the one he had placed around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of rain, and something steadier, something that reminded her of safety. She pressed it to her chest, and the reckless vow she had made echoed in her ears. "Then marry me." She almost laughed bitterly. It was supposed to be sarcasm, a weapon against humiliation. Yet, somehow, he had agreed. And now, there was no turning back. When she stepped outside her apartment later that day, he was already there, standing with his usual quiet stance, the uniform pressed neatly, his expression unreadable. His name was Ethan. She had never cared to know it before. To her, he had only been the guard. Now, that name carried an entirely different weight. Claire's voice trembled when she spoke. "About what I said last night, do you even realize what it means?" Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "If you want to go through with it, we set terms. If not, you can forget it." But I meant my answer. Her heart jolted, He was serious. Inside a small cafe nearby, the two of them sat facing each other. The air was thick with the smell of roasted coffee beans and the buzz of conversations around them, but to Claire it felt like the world had shrunk to just the table between them. "I do not want pity," she said firmly. "And I do not want love. I need protection from their eyes, from their whispers. A husband on paper, that is all." Ethan leaned back, his eyes dark and steady. "Then we make it a contract. No love, no expectation, no demands outside of what is agreed." The word contract stung her, but it was exactly what she wanted. Safety without vulnerability. A shield without the risk of heartbreak. "What do you want in return?" she asked cautiously. There was a pause. His jaw tightened, as if he were choosing his words with care. "A name. A role that covers me when I need it. You will not ask questions about my past or my work. In public, we are husband and wife. In private, we live as strangers unless circumstances require otherwise." Claire studied him carefully. His terms were oddly specific, almost as though he had been waiting for such an arrangement. She dismissed the thought. After all, who would want to marry a woman branded as a failure? "Fine," she said, her voice steady now. "We will treat it as business." Planting the finality of her words, she pulled the ring from her finger, a plain, simple band he had given her the night before in the rain. She held it up under the cafe's dull light. It was so unremarkable that it almost mocked her former glittering diamond, the one her ex-husband had flaunted like a trophy. But she slid it back onto her finger anyway. "This will be our symbol," she said coldly. Ethan's lips pressed into a line, almost a smile, but not quite. "So be it." They shook hands across the table, sealing the pact like two business partners. The contrast was brutal. She, a woman once displayed as a prized jewel in high society, and he, a man society barely noticed beyond the gates of her building, now bound together by nothing but pride and desperation. As they left the cafe, Claire caught sight of people staring. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Let them whisper. Let them laugh. She had a husband now, even if it was nothing more than ink on an invisible contract. What she could not see, however, was the faint flicker in Ethan's eyes. Behind the mask of a guard, behind the simple ring, he carried secrets. She could not even imagine secrets that would one day turn their fragile arrangement upside down. For now, though, their lives had just merged into a carefully staged lie. And once the first step was taken, there was no easy way back. The days that followed were a blur of awkward routines and unspoken boundaries. Claire had never imagined herself sharing space with someone like Ethan. He was disciplined, precise, and frustratingly calm in every situation. She, on the other hand, was still fighting to reclaim her dignity, to prove to the world that she was not broken. Their so-called marriage was a shield, but behind closed doors it was anything but harmonious. On the very first morning under the same roof, Claire walked into the kitchen to find him standing in front of the stove. The smell of something burning filled the air. She froze, then narrowed her eyes. "Are you trying to kill us?" she asked sharply, waving her hand at the smoke. Ethan turned, holding a spatula in one hand, a pan in the other, and a piece of charred toast on the plate. His expression remained calm, though his ears flushed slightly. "I thought breakfast would help ease the tension." Claire stared at the mess and let out a dry laugh. "This is not breakfast. This is evidence for the fire department." He set the plate down with a quiet shrug. "You could have told me you do not eat toast." "I do eat toast. I just prefer it not to be turned into coal." She shot back, crossing her arms. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then unexpectedly, Claire laughed. The sound startled even her. The tension cracked just slightly, and Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was the first time she realized that maybe he was not as unshakable as he seemed. But their clashes did not end in the kitchen. Later that week, while reorganizing her things in the study, Claire stumbled upon a small, leather-bound notebook tucked inside a drawer. Curious, she flipped it open and scanned the neat handwriting inside. At first, she thought it was some sort of diary, but the pages were filled with calculations, stock symbols, and financial strategies. Her brows furrowed. She muttered under her breath, "Since when does a guard care about market shares and dividends?" Ethan walked in just as she held the notebook. His eyes flicked to it, his expression unreadable. "You should not be going through things that are not yours," he said evenly, his tone sharper than usual. Claire raised the notebook defiantly. "You are a security guard, Ethan. Why are you scribbling about mergers and investments? Planning your fantasy fortune?" His gaze darkened for a moment, then softened into something almost playful. "Maybe it is just a hobby. Everyone needs a way to pass the time," she snorted. "Some people knit scarves. You daydream about Wall Street. How fitting." Ethan said nothing more, simply reaching out and taking the notebook from her hands. He placed it back into the drawer with meticulous care. But the exchange left Claire unsettled. There was something in his eyes. Something he was hiding. In public, their performance as husband and wife was convincing enough. They appeared side by side at social gatherings, her chin raised in defiance of the whispers, his presence steady and unwavering. But behind closed doors, their banter was sharp, their walls high. Yet, beneath the sarcasm and the clashes, something else was growing. Every small gesture planted seeds she did not want to acknowledge. The way he always stood between her and prying eyes. The way he never once mocked her for her past, even when everyone else did. One evening, after another long day of enduring cruel glances from society, Claire sank into the couch, exhausted. Ethan placed a glass of water on the table beside her without a word. She looked at him, puzzled. "Why are you doing all of this?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze, steady and calm. "Because you asked me to stand by your side. That is what I intend to do." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than any grand declaration could have. She turned away quickly, hiding the way her chest tightened. Claire told herself this was still just a contract, still just business. But deep inside, she could not ignore the subtle shift. Somewhere between burnt toast and mysterious notebooks, their staged marriage had begun to feel like something dangerously real. The weeks moved forward, and with them came an endless stream of stares, whispers, and cruel gossip. Every time Claire stepped outside, she could feel the weight of society pressing down on her, judging her for falling from the pedestal she had once stood upon. To them, she was the woman who had gone from a wealthy wife to marrying a guard. To her, every sneer was a knife cutting deeper into wounds that had barely begun to close. Yet Ethan never faltered. At public events, he stood tall beside her, his presence quiet but unshakable. When former acquaintances tried to humiliate her with backhanded compliments, his eyes alone silenced them. It was as though he carried a shield around her, invisible but powerful, and she found herself clinging to that protection more often than she cared to admit. One evening, they attended a charity dinner hosted by one of her ex-husband's business allies. The room was filled with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the clinking of expensive wine glasses. The moment Claire walked in on Ethan's arm, the whispers began. "Is that her? She actually married the guard? Unbelievable. From diamonds to scraps." Claire's cheeks burned, but Ethan tightened his grip on her hand and leaned closer. His low voice cut through the noise only she could hear. "Look ahead. They only have power if you look back." She drew in a steadying breath and lifted her chin, her posture regal despite the storm within. For the rest of the evening, Ethan never left her side. When an old acquaintance smirked and asked, "So, Claire, how is married life with, what is it that you do again?" Ethan answered calmly, "With me by her side, she will never need to explain herself to anyone." The man fell silent, caught off guard by the strength behind the words. Later that night, as they walked home under the glow of the streetlights, Claire whispered, "Why do you care so much? You could have left me to drown in their cruelty." Ethan's eyes softened. "Because cruelty is easy, dignity is not, and everyone deserves dignity." For a long moment, Claire had no words. The silence between them felt different that night, not heavy with unspoken arguments, but gentle, almost comforting. Still, there were cracks in the fragile bond forming between them. Claire could not forget the humiliations she had endured, and she guarded her heart fiercely. Ethan, on the other hand, kept his own secrets buried deep. That leather-bound notebook she had discovered still haunted her thoughts. Who exactly was this man who seemed too calm, too wise, too prepared for someone who was only supposed to be a guard? One Sunday morning, she found herself watching him from across the garden. He was repairing a broken fence, sleeves rolled up, sunlight catching the lines of strength in his arms. There was nothing glamorous about the moment, yet something about the steadiness of his movements drew her in. She realized she had not seen such grounded reliability in years. Her heart betrayed her, skipping a beat. She turned away quickly, reminding herself that this was a contract. Nothing more. But the truth was harder to ignore each day. She was beginning to find comfort in his presence, and that terrified her more than any insult society could hurl. That night, as they shared a quiet meal, Claire broke the silence. "Do you ever regret saying yes to me, to this arrangement?" Ethan looked at her steadily, his fork resting on the plate. "Regret is for those who do not know why they made a choice. I knew." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Claire wanted to press him, to demand answers, but she bit back the urge. Instead, she nodded faintly and looked down at her plate, her chest tightening. Day by day, the staged marriage was shifting. What began as a wall to protect her pride was slowly becoming something else. Something fragile, dangerous, and real. And though neither of them would admit it aloud, both knew the line between contract and connection was thinning with every heartbeat they shared. The fragile balance of their contract began to crack under the pressure of outside forces. Claire thought the worst was already behind her, but society was relentless. One morning, as she walked through the city, she noticed the familiar sting of whispers chasing her. A group of women she once dined with at charity luncheons passed by, their voices low but sharp enough to wound. Look at her now. From being the wife of a tycoon to clinging to a guard. It is pathetic, really. She is nothing more than a desperate woman hiding behind a uniform. Claire kept her chin raised, but each word felt like another stone pressed against her chest. When she returned home, Ethan was waiting. He noticed the redness in her eyes, but did not press her. Instead, he handed her a warm cup of tea and said simply, "Let them talk. Their words cannot build or break who you are." But it was not just gossip anymore. Ethan's world, the one Claire still knew nothing about, was beginning to bleed into theirs. One evening, she overheard a tense phone call. His voice was sharper than usual, his calm demeanor replaced by urgency. Words like shareholders, contracts, and threats drifted from the room before the line went dead. When she stepped into view, he quickly ended the call, his jaw tight. "Who was that?" she asked. "Work," he said flatly. "You are a guard," she pressed, her eyes narrowing. "Since when do guards negotiate with shareholders?" Ethan's silence was louder than any lie. Finally, he said, "It does not concern you. Remember the terms. You agreed not to ask questions." The wall between them, once softened by unspoken tenderness, rose again. Claire felt the sting of being shut out, of realizing once more that their marriage was a facade. And yet, she could not ignore the gnawing suspicion that Ethan was far more than what he pretended to be. That suspicion deepened when her former in-laws struck. At a lavish gathering she attended with Ethan, her ex-husband's mother cornered her. Her words were poisoned with venom. "You are shameless, Claire. You humiliated our family, and now you humiliate yourself even further. Did you think marrying a guard would restore your worth? He cannot protect you from disgrace." Claire's fingers curled into fists, her pride warring with pain. Before she could speak, Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm and unyielding. "Careful with your words. She does not stand alone anymore." The older woman sneered. "And who are you to warn me? A man who watches doors for a living?" The room went silent. Ethan's gaze did not waver, but he said nothing more. His silence was not weakness, it was restraint. Still, Claire felt her stomach twist. She could see the storm in his eyes, and she knew there was truth buried beneath his quiet facade. That night, as they returned home, Claire confronted him again. "You cannot keep hiding. Who are you really, Ethan? What are you protecting me from?" He met her gaze, the conflict in his eyes undeniable, but his lips refused to form an answer. The pressure around them was closing in. Gossip had turned into threats, and secrets were clawing their way to the surface. Claire could feel the fragile foundation of their contract marriage trembling, and though she could not see the full truth yet, she knew one thing for certain. Ethan's life was far bigger, far more dangerous, and far more powerful than anything she had imagined. The storm that had begun with whispers was building towards something far greater. And it was only a matter of time before everything was revealed. The tension between Claire and Ethan grew heavier with every passing day. Their contract had been meant to shield her from ridicule, but now it was pulling her into shadows she could not explain. Each unanswered question, each guarded look in his eyes, only deepened her unease. It came to a breaking point one evening at a charity gala hosted in the heart of the city. Claire had been hesitant to attend, but Ethan insisted. "You cannot hide," he told her. "If you want them to respect you, you must face them." Oh, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, but beneath the glamour lay a sea of judgmental eyes. Claire felt them all, the snickers and whispers disguised as polite smiles. She clung to Ethan's arm, her pride forcing her posture straight even as her heart pounded. Halfway through the evening, an old acquaintance approached her with feigned sympathy. "Claire, dear, I heard you married the guard from your building." "How quaint. Do you still pay him by the hour, or is it a monthly arrangement?" Laughter rippled among the group. Claire's face flushed, her words caught in her throat. Before she could answer, Ethan stepped forward. His presence was calm, but there was steel in his voice. "She owes you no explanation. A man's worth is not measured by his uniform." The remark silenced the group, but the sting of humiliation still clung to Claire. Later that night, as she slipped away from the crowd to catch her breath, Ethan found her standing alone in the hallway. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Why do you keep defending me?" she asked softly. "You do not even gain anything from this. Unless," her voice faltered, "unless you are hiding something." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You are imagining things." But fate chose that moment to betray him. As he reached into his jacket for his phone, his wallet slipped out, landing on the marble floor. A silver card case slid open, and from it gleamed a platinum bank card embossed with his name. Claire froze, her breath catching. She bent down and picked it up slowly, her hand trembling. "A platinum account? This is not something a guard carries, Ethan." He reached for it quickly, his eyes flashing with rare alarm. "It is not what you think." "Oh." Her voice cracked as anger and confusion flooded through her. "Then tell me what island. Tell me who you are. Because everything about you screams that you are not the man you claim to be." He closed his hand over the card, his face unreadable. "It belongs to a friend. I was holding it for him." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. Claire stared at him, her chest aching with betrayal. "A friend? You expect me to believe that?" Ethan said nothing more, his silence heavier than any lie. He turned away, slipping the card back into his wallet. For the rest of the night, Claire could not shake the image of that card, the glint of wealth that had no place in the life of a simple guard. Her mind raced with questions, but her heart carried a deeper fear that the fragile bond they had built was founded on deception. Back at home, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the storm outside rattled the windows. The words replayed in her head. "It belongs to a friend." But in her heart, she knew Ethan's truth was far bigger, far more dangerous, and far more life-altering than he was willing to admit. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it would grow until there was no choice left but revelation. Millionaire said. The night of revelation arrived sooner than Claire expected. The whispers of society, the threats from her ex-husband's circle, and Ethan's guarded silence, all collided at one glittering event, the annual corporate gala, hosted by one of the city's most powerful business families. Claire entered the grand ballroom on Ethan's arm, still haunted by the memory of the platinum card. She had promised herself that she would not confront him again, not here, but her mind refused to rest. Every step beside him felt like walking alongside a stranger. The evening unfolded with its usual decadence. Sparkling chandeliers, the clinking of champagne glasses, the hum of conversations laced with hidden agendas. But beneath the surface, tension brewed. Claire could sense it in Ethan's body, the way his shoulders stiffened each time a business rival approached. Halfway through the night, the truth tore itself free. A heated dispute erupted on stage between two corporate magnates. Documents were presented. Accusations of fraud hurled back and forth. Suddenly, Ethan was called out by name. Claire's heart lurched. "Ethan Ward," a man barked, pointing toward him. "The heir of Ward Enterprises. Are you truly going to stand there and let your family's legacy be dragged through the mud?" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Claire froze, her mind struggling to process the words. "Heir? Enterprises? All eyes turned to Ethan. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Claire saw the man. She thought she knew the quiet guard who had stood outside her building. But then, he stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding in a way that silenced the entire hall. I will not allow lies to dismantle what generations have built. Ward Enterprises will not fall into the hands of vultures. The room erupted in murmurs, flashes from cameras sparking like lightning. Claire's heart pounded as the truth crashed over her. The man she had mocked for burnt toast, the man she had married out of spite and desperation, was no guard at all. He was the hidden heir to a corporate empire. Her gaze dropped to her hand, to the simple ring Ethan had given her that rainy night. It had seemed so plain, so unremarkable, but now she realized it was no ordinary band. Subtle engravings lined the inside, marks of custom craftsmanship, the kind that only someone with wealth and intention would provide. It had never been a placeholder. It had always been real. Claire's breath caught, her chest tightening as a flood of emotions overwhelmed her: shock, betrayal, awe, and something far deeper she dared not name. Ethan turned toward her briefly, his eyes meeting hers across the chaos. In that single glance, she saw both confession and plea. The man she thought she knew was gone. In his place stood someone far more powerful, far more dangerous, and far more capable of breaking her heart than she had ever imagined. The truth was out, and nothing between them would ever be the same again. The ride home from the gala was suffocating. Claire sat rigid in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the blur of city lights rushing past the window. Ethan sat beside her, silent, his expression unreadable. The revelation of his true identity still rang in her ears, louder than the applause and gasps of the crowd. Finally, she turned to him, her voice sharp with betrayal. All this time, you let me believe you were nothing more than a guard. You lied to me. You let me humiliate myself in front of the world, while you stood there with your secrets. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. I never lied. I never said I was only a guard. You assumed. And I let you. Oh, Claire's chest heaved, her hands curling into fists. Do not twist this on me. You watched me suffer. You watched them laugh at me, and you said nothing. Was it a game to you? Was I just some test of character for the great Ethan Ward? His voice dropped, raw and urgent. It was never a game. I did not plan for this to happen. At first, yes. I wanted to know if someone could see me without the weight of my name. But Claire, it stopped being about that a long time ago. You think I stood beside you out of pity? No. I stayed because I love you. The words struck her like thunder. Love. She wanted to believe him, but her heart was torn between fury and longing. Her voice cracked as she whispered, You let me marry you thinking you were beneath me. Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how small I felt? Clinging to a man I thought had nothing, and now I find out you had everything? Ethan leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. Claire, you were never small. Not once. You have more strength than all of them combined. Do you not see it? You are the only one who looked at me and saw a man, not a fortune. That is why I fell. That is why I cannot let you go. Tears welled in her eyes, but anger still gripped her. I do not know if I can forgive you. I do not know if I can trust anything you say. Ethan's voice broke slightly, the calm finally cracking. Then hate me if you must. But know this, Claire. Every moment, every word, every look, none of it was pretend. The contract may have started this, but what I feel now is real. The car pulled to a stop outside their home, but neither moved. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and desires. Claire looked at the ring on her finger, the simple band that suddenly carried the weight of truth. Her heart ached with the war inside her. The marriage had begun as a facade, but now it stood at a crossroads. Betrayal or redemption, bitterness or love. And Claire knew the choice ahead would define not just their future, but her very sense of dignity and worth. The following weeks tested everything Claire thought she knew about herself, about Ethan, and about love. The revelation of his true identity had spread like wildfire. Headlines called her the accidental bride of a billionaire heir, and society feasted on the scandal. But the cruel irony was that her former in-laws, the very people who mocked her most, were now exposed for their corruption. Their empire crumbled under investigations, their wealth slipping through their fingers like sand. Claire watched from the sidelines as justice finally found them. Yet her own heart remained unsettled. Every time she looked at Ethan, she felt the weight of both betrayal and undeniable devotion. He had lied by omission, yes, but he had also been the only one who had truly stood by her when she had nothing. One quiet evening, Ethan found her in the garden. She stood by the roses, their petals glistening under the soft glow of the lanterns. He approached slowly, no longer carrying the shield of silence. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but tender. "I cannot change the way this began. I cannot erase the deception. But I can promise you one thing. There will be no more secrets, no more contracts, only truth." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with both tears and resolve. "Do you know what hurt me the most, Ethan? It was not your name or your fortune. It was believing that I was unwanted, that I had to beg for dignity while you hid behind a mask. I need more than wealth. I need honesty." Ethan's gaze softened. Slowly, he dropped to one knee, pulling from his pocket the simple band she had worn since the night of their reckless vow. But this time, the ring gleamed with a small, flawless diamond modest compared to the treasures he could afford, yet priceless for what it symbolized. "This ring is not a contract," he said, his voice breaking with sincerity. "It is my vow. I love you, not as a shield, not as a test, but as my wife, my equal, my partner. Will you accept me this time without lies?" Claire's breath caught. For a long moment, the world was silent, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the roses. Then, with trembling hands, she reached down and lifted him from his knees. Her answer was quiet, but it carried all the strength she had regained. "Yes, Ethan. But this time, it is real." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she felt its weight not of gold or diamond, but of truth. The woman who had once been discarded now stood tall, not because of the man beside her, but because she had found her own worth. And together, for the first time without pretense, they walked forward not into a contract, but into love.